Tuesday, May 22nd. We have our first fiscal year 2013 budget session. This is a Council of the Whole meeting. Councilors present. We have Councilor Hay, Councilor Thibault Munez, Councilor Reynolds, Councilor Carboni, Councilor Boisvert, Councilor Di Natale, Councilor Caddy, Councilor Tran, Councilor Clark, and myself. Councilor Bean had a prior engagement that he let me know that he wasn't going to be here this evening. To start off, I know we have a few things, fire, human resource law, and the mayor's office to go over tonight. Being the first night of the budget session, I didn't know if the mayor would like to start the session off with an overview or philosophy or...
So thank you and good evening, City Councilors. I'm pleased to report out a general fund budget of approximately $100,752,756. In addition, an airport budget of $931,528. Wastewater enterprise at $10,444,349, and a water department budget of $5,344,174. As you know, we've been working very hard with all of you to instill good management practices over the past few years, as well as to be fiscally conservative so that we can make sure that not only do we have balanced budgets, but also that we're able to sustain the services that we want and also begin to, I would say, make up for decades of neglect on the capital side. So something that you will see later on in June, once we work with the Capital Commission, is a budget for capital expenditures that are not included in your packet tonight, but are still something that we are working with the Capital Commission, and will bring something forward to the council at a later point in time. And in addition to what is here, as you know, we have built up a stabilization fund that is approximately about $3.5 million to date. There are other cities that have actually been drawing down on stabilization funds rather than building them up. So at approximately 3.5% of our budget, we are 2 to 3 times higher than some of our, I would say, sister cities in a similar condition. And I have to say that's because of all of you and the hard work and the priority that we've given to that account to make sure that when there's an economic downturn, when we see the downward trend, that we have at least some choices and some ability to be able to stabilize the budget in those future years. So what you see here is a culmination of many years of work, many years of collaborative decision making, but also a strategy to make sure that when we talk about stability, we're not just talking about this year's budget, we're talking about budgets to come. In that light, with full disclosure, we looked at fiscal year 14 and 15, so things that you'll be discussing in 1 to 2 years from now. We have identified budget deficits, as you know, if any long-term projections, because healthcare and pension costs are still out of control, not just for us, but also across the state, across the country, and in the private sector. They become what I consider budget busters, which means they are growing faster than revenue sources are growing, and therefore everything has to be done in order to make sure that those things are addressed, and we're working with state and federal officials in order to find ways to cap those costs, change laws so that they're not out of control, and we don't continue to see these deficits. But given working hard with department heads, we have projected forward what happens if we do nothing, what happens if we sit on our hands, and that would mean an approximately $1 million deficit for next year and about a $500,000 deficit for the year after that. Knowing that now allows us to prepare to make changes in which we will continue to do in terms of seeking out grants, in terms of finding ways to lower those projected costs especially for employee benefits and so on. In addition to other ways that we can find to grow our revenue sources in a way that is because of positive economic development, not because we want to continue to tax to the max in terms of our citizens. So these are all collective goals that we have, and it's certainly something for you to consider as you look at this current year budget before you. A couple of things that I want to note. The City of Fitchburg has about 17 different bargaining units. Earlier this year, the bargaining units made some changes and unanimously agreed to changes that are saving us an additional $800,000 per year. This is in addition to the 1.7 per year that was saved about 3 years ago. So it brings our total savings, again, had we done nothing, to about $2.5 million per year for the next 2 years. And then after that, we're going to continue to find more ways in which we can have savings. So again, we're not spending all of our money on health premiums. Because of things like that, we're able to do a few things. This particular budget does put 10 more police officers on the street, not through hiring police officers, but actually through the hiring of civilian dispatchers over the course of the current fiscal year that we're in. This sustains those hires and has the ability for us to actually put 10 officers on the street. If we hired police officers directly, rather than hiring dispatchers to replace them in the dispatch room, we might only be able to have a net benefit of about 6. So it's innovative strategies like this that are being able to stretch our dollars and provide more services to the community. In addition, thanks to the support from this council, we more than doubled the hours at the library, adding 27 hours, and now the library is open 6 days a week, and we are on track for recertification sometime in August. Again, this budget sustains that and allows us to apply for that reauthorization. There's also a half-time position in here to oversee public facilities and to help us implement the capital budget. We've made some cuts over the past few years. For example, we reduced the custodian position right here at City Hall. Instead of, again, looking at just bringing back custodial services, we thought that one of the best things that we can do is to look at somebody who can help us look at the overall capital plan, as well as look at maintenance plans for all of our buildings. We know that this short-term dollar will help us figure out how to save millions of dollars by getting us back on track with the buildings, such as City Hall, the Senior Center, the library, and also all the property that the city does own throughout the city. We found that a similar position in the school department has actually saved the city money because the increase in debt service due to improvements in the buildings is actually eclipsed by the actual savings. The savings are even greater. So there was actually more money to invest back into services, and we hope to see the same for the city. You'll also see that there is an increase in Chapter 70 funds for education. You can look at that in the revenues, and you'll see that there's a comparable line item increase in the school budget. The school budget, as you know, here is a line item in this budget. It actually has yet to be approved by the school committee. We just had our second reading of our budget last night, and we'll be approving it sometime the next few weeks, and then we'll be ready for you in full detail when that budget presentation happens. We'd like to get it to you early so that you have it for several weeks, and of course can call school committee members or the administration and ask us any questions or clarifications prior to that budget hearing. And lastly, one of the things that we've seen is a 300% increase in veteran benefits that we give out since fiscal year 10. A comparable note to that is that you'll also see an increase in veterans benefits reimbursements on the revenue side. It's 1 year delayed, so we give out the benefits and we're able to apply for 70% reimbursement the following year. You'll see that that's increased pretty dramatically because we do have an aging population of veterans who are actively seeking out services, but we've also been doing a better job to make sure that veterans know that they are entitled, that these are benefits that they're entitled to, and that they're able to apply for these services. So those are just some highlights, and again, I'll be here throughout the budget process, and certainly the department heads are here as well to answer any questions that you have.
Councilors, is there anything that you'd like to ask before or make statement on the budget prior to the start of the review? Councilor Hay.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't expect the mayor or Dick to have an answer for this, but if they could write these ones down and get back to me, I would appreciate it. If you can show us the number of employees that were funded in the last budget, comparable to the number of employees that are funded in this budget. If you can show us the number of new positions that are in the budget, and the number of employees by position that have salary increases above and beyond what the usual step and grade would be that the collective bargaining would award them.
Any other questions on the revenue side of the budget that we received? It was pretty straightforward. We received it, I think, on the first of the month. We've been over it a couple of times. I guess we'll move on to page 26, Fire Department. Fire Department Personal Services, budget, $3,774,594. Total benefits and stipends, $1,342,658. Fire prevention, $113,221. Total office supplies, $25,000. Total vehicle and equipment, $208,300. Total building maintenance, $185,000. Total fire department budget, $5,648,773. Chief.
Good evening, councilors. Just would like, I'm sure the councilors looked at the budget, but our page of explaining our duties and some of our goals for next year, I believe it's page 6 of the last section, under which the fire department's cover page of explanations of what we do and some of the goals we hope to attain in the coming year. Obviously, councilors, again, rather a lean budget. For us, we had originally requested about a $5.8 million budget. Many discussions with the mayor on these issues. This budget does have 2 less firefighter positions in it that are due to retirements coming up in June. They haven't happened yet. And there is a reduction in overtime by about $75,000. We have applied for an AFG grant, another SAFER grant, that's worked out very well for us. Those grants started getting distributed last Friday. They will be distributed every Friday now for a few months. We have not heard on that. That would help us out tremendously, and we applied through that grant for the purpose of filling retirements. So in discussions with the mayor, we agreed that we would hold off a little bit to see how the grants come out, and if we don't get a grant on that, I would be looking to get some funding to put those 2 positions back in the budget to bring us back to 76 uniform firefighters or 52 firefighters, firefighter ranks. Same with the overtime. The overtime, we're on schedule to spend over $250,000 this year. However, obviously, with 2 less positions, we would spend more than that next year. And other than that, it was normal increases in expense side that we've seen, electricity, fuel, and things of that nature.
Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you, Mr. President. I prepared a statement on this fire budget, if everybody would please bear with me. In reviewing the mayor's proposed FY13 fire budget, I wish to address concerns and observations that I have. The mayor has stated that the entire budget proposal is fiscally responsible. It is therefore acceptable to believe that the individual pieces of the mayor's proposal are also fiscally responsible. I believe that this fire department budget is not fiscally responsible. One item I have reservations about is the fire chief's salary. Through Auditor Saracen, I have confirmed the following. The fire chief's salary in FY12 is $141,000, which includes $98,000 in base pay and $43,000 in benefits and incentives. The fire chief's salary in FY13, if this proposal is accepted, would increase to $166,000, or by 18%. While the base salary is increasing by 48%, the overall salary is only 18% more due to concessions on incentives and benefits in exchange for a higher base pay. Factoring in additional pension liability costs for the next 30 years at 80%, this one position will cost taxpayers an extra $600,000. It is important to point this fact out since pension costs, being the budget buster for any city in town, usually get left out of the public discussion. The mayor believes it is fiscally responsible to agree to such a substantial pay increase for one position within a department that is already at low staffing levels. I recall that concessions were made by the fire union to lower the base salary of a starting firefighter position while also giving up some stipend benefits. Each year it is reported to the City Council how the fire department cannot meet the minimum national staffing requirement per line of 17 due to budget restraints. Just a few years back, this city was in jeopardy of closing one of its 3 fire stations. In addition, the overtime funding the mayor is proposing is grossly inadequate based on the last 7 years of spending. There will no doubt be a future request from free cash to supplement this line item. An analysis of the last 7 years of the fire department's spending shows a department financially stretched thin. It therefore makes no sense to me why the mayor would advocate one position be given such a substantial increase while substantial needs are still apparent. 2 years ago, when the mayor renegotiated the police chief's salary, I voted against funding that new contract for the similar reasons that I state now. My statements then were in no way a reflection of the individual's job performance, and they are not now. Therefore, to be consistent, I cannot support this proposal. This is purely an issue of how best to allocate taxpayer funds so that taxpayers get the most use out of their investment. Thank you.
Response? Councilor Clark?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I heard the chief say that overtime would be reduced by $75,000. Is that right?
That's correct, Council.
Because in the statement that you have that's at the back, the figure is quoted at $100,000. But
Councilor, at the final days of the budget, I had another discussion with the mayor. She was able to find $25,000 more. The narrative never got changed. It's 225 and 75,000.
so 75.
It's 75 less, yes. We're currently at 300,000. This budget calls for 225. And that was a last-minute addition by the mayor.
Thank you, Chief.
Councilor Hay?
Thank you, Mr. President. Chief or the mayor, I'm not sure. It was stated that we're applying for grants, hoping to use those grants to fulfill some of the retirement spots. Is that correct, Chief?
That's correct.
Two questions in relationship to that. One is, do we have a plan if the grants don't come through as to how we'll deal with those positions? And the second one is, if we do get those grants and fill those positions, do we have a plan to sustain those positions after the grants run out?
I can answer part of that, Councilor. I'll give you an example. When I take the two firefighters that are retiring jobs out of the budget, I take out $125,000 because they're senior firefighters that have a lot of benefits, and I can replace those two people for about $80,000. So there is a savings there substantially because of the reductions we made. The mayor will have to answer if that money's available, if I need it afterwards. The grant programs that we've done have been very successful. We've hired 18 people. Although we've had 30 retirements in that same time frame, we have hired 18 people, and we've been able to absorb 12 of those jobs so far. So there's only 4 left on grants, and due to the reductions we made with the union, we feel that we can sustain those jobs. And I think, as most of the councilors know, we've talked about, we feel we need to be at 80 firefighters, which is still substantially less than we've had for many years, but we realize the financial situation the city and the state's in, so our goal is to get to 80. If we get the grant would bring us to 78, and that would be full payment of that grant for the next 2 years, no charge to the city.
In regards to some specific items of this budget, but also it pertains to the police budget as well, the overtime issue is something that we've been grappling with. And in fact, we've been able to have overtime reductions just by changing the way that we staff, and some of it is going to be needed through contractual changes. So these are active discussions that are happening right now. Obviously, until they're actually done, I can't share with you any progress, but we're always looking at ways in order to get those costs down. And if we're not able to do it in previous years, then we're going to continue to do it through open contract negotiations, such as we have with the fire department right now. Another important factor that is not really encapsulated in the budget is the fact that the fire department has actually been very effective. One of the things that they have definitely done over the past few years is made significant progress in fire prevention. When you do things like that, it eliminates oftentimes the need for the actual service itself. These are the types of things that we're going to continue to do. We want to start preventing things from happening rather than just continuing to increase funding for things when they happen or after they happen. And these are things that we're going to continue to work on as well. In terms of the future year budget items, you'll see that I have a very conservative figure of negative $80,000 if there are future retirements. But in fact, there are a significant number of firefighters who are eligible to retire, so perhaps more would. And I think that's the hard part about projecting out in the future, which is trying to figure out, who's going to retire when and what that would mean. And I think in this particular case, the potential is there for that to happen. So we are projecting a very conservative figure for the next few years. But again, in addition to those savings, if we choose to add the firefighters back, they're done so at a significantly reduced cost.
Thank you.
Councilor Reynolds?
I have three questions, and one perhaps you covered it, but perhaps there's something else to say on the issue. How can you be so sure that overtime cost will be reduced? Or is this the figure that you're putting in now, in anticipation that in the future you'll simply come back and ask for more? That's number one. Number two, what is the justification for the pay raise of your position? And number three is the ambulance service, what are the financial facts of that? Is it successful bringing money into the city?
Yeah.
In whatever order you'd like to.
If I could just answer those generally, and Chief, you can certainly jump in if you have specifics. Regarding the overtime issue, there's really, I would say, generally two categories of overtime that I see. Anticipated overtime that happens knowing the staffing levels and also knowing what our contractual obligation in terms of people being able to take time off and being able to cover shifts. And then there is the unexpected overtime. We actually saw this pretty significantly with the police department last year when there was a number of absences due to injuries, injuries above and beyond what had happened in previous years. That was really the bulk of a lot of the increases in overtime there. So we try and really look at what we can anticipate, try and have some wiggle room in terms of what we can anticipate. But like snow and ice, you know, that budget can vary from $500,000 to well over $1 million, is we do the best we can given past projections. The second question that you had was related to the salary. 2 years ago, we started looking at department head salaries, especially as we shifted more duties to department heads, including in the cases of police and fire, becoming grant writers and significantly overseeing reduced staff. And reducing staffing levels does involve strategic changes. There was a reduction in brass in both those particular departments, which meant that the administrative level positions took on more duties. This is not just the chief, but this is also other positions within both those departments. Also, the success and the comparable salaries that we looked at in other cities and towns. In fact, for example, the city of Gloucester did a comprehensive analysis of all of their departments and are readjusting all of those this year. So this is something that's fairly common statewide in terms of looking at being competitive and also beginning to really attract and retain quality department heads who are able to be effective. And I think, I mean, Chief Roy is undoubtedly, I think, one of the most respected and top fire chiefs in the state. He sits on a number of boards and commissions and has been pivotal not only in getting us a significant amount of grants, I mean, millions and millions of dollars just in my time here for equipment and for staff, but has also been part of actually changing policies and lobbying for those dollars to be made available in the first place. So I think we're very, very lucky to have the two public safety chiefs that we have. I think they've been incredibly effective in continuing to make progress in both those areas despite having less resources, and that itself I think is speaks to their management and their capabilities. We've also made some significant contractual changes, and they've been involved in those, and those have had permanent savings and effects for the city of Fitchburg. The third question that you had is the ambulance. I'm going to refer to the chief for that one. We I think a few years ago, did increase the revenues we received from $400,000 a year to $450,000 a year. That is actually something that will be renegotiated soon. I think that contract is up sometime, I would say probably, I think at the end of this fiscal year. I'm not sure if I'm accurate about that.
No, we signed a 5-year contract in
Okay.
2011, so we've got a ways out. but
Right,
I'll be
and I
right
think
back.
one of the things to note is that in terms of the junior officers that are on the ambulance, you know, the ones that we've hired are also at a significantly less pay, so the expenses required to fund the ambulances in order to get that revenue have decreased for the department overall.
In response to your response, would this pay increase stay with that position? In other words, once that our current chief retires, is that what the position would be offered at, whatever the
No.
figure is there?
I'm not going to speak for the chief on when he anticipates on retiring. It could be in 1 month or 1 decade, who knows? But I think at that time, we would look at a competitive rate that is probably a wide swath, dependent on the experience of the finalists that we do choose. and any negotiations that take place.
And would this pay increase mean an increase in pension money that the chief would receive upon retirement?
Any pay increases, including steps, COLAs, and so on, do increase pension costs. But in general, overall, we've actually been able to reduce pension costs because we've been able to reduce the overall staffing levels of the city, and because we've made some changes in terms of healthcare. We're able to save the city tens of millions of dollars just through those types of changes.
Council, I'll elaborate on a couple of those. The overtime, we did start this fiscal year with $170,000. We saw we need more. We came back in for $130,000. It's anticipated that's going to last us through the end of the year. So we know that we are going to need more than $225,000. However, I don't have a problem coming back in if the money's available when we need it and justify the needs of that. As far as the ambulance issue is concerned, we now get a $450,000 payment guaranteed from MedStar Ambulance, also known as Fitchburg EMS. They bought us this year a $160,000 vehicle for our people to use. They provide all our training, all our medical supplies. So I anticipate with the cost of a 5-year lease on a vehicle, we're well into the $525,000 range of what they provide for us. And what I've done over the last couple of years is send out our number of transports to the hospital with our billing ratios to 2 private vendors who have told us we are probably in the $425,000 to $450,000 range we would be bringing in if we were billing that and running that ourselves. So I think the city's getting a good deal on that. And it's not talked about very much anywhere, but we're one of the few cities that has 3 ambulances dedicated to EMS, to emergency calls, and 2 of those vehicles paramedics. And we put 4 to 5 people on ALS calls to take care of seriously ill or injured people. And that's not done very often anywhere in the state, never mind a city in the financial state that Fitchburg's in. Your third question, I'm going to let the mayor speak for my salary. I'm not very good at sitting talking about what I do. However, I've done it for 17 years as a department head here and worked for the city for 38. I started talking to the mayor last March of 2011. Felt that I needed a raise, that I deserved it. I think the council should be aware that a number of those things were taken out of other line items and put in to my baseline line items. So Councilor Di Natale was pretty close, although I haven't made $141,000 in any year that I've been here. So, but it's close. It's very close. This year it may be. So, Councilor, I certainly respect your opinion. I know where you're coming from on these things. However, I do feel I run a emergency department 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm here in the city all the time, dedicated to the city and to the department. And I agree with the mayor. I think we run one of the best fire departments in the state, if not New England. And I would just like to be paid comparable with other positions that do similar type work.
Councilor Di Natale.
Mr. Saracen, is the salary currently not $141,000? Per your email to me?
It's that amount, or it might have been the amount that the chief could have gotten if he took advantage of all the buybacks. So it might have been, I think it is the right number. I think when we ran one schedule on actual, it was around 139 for last year.
Yeah, all I'm saying, Councilor, is that I'm just telling you what my
year.
W-2s were
So-
for the last 4 years. It could be that this year.
It's very close, around 140.
It's always difficult to talk about these things because I don't want them to get muddied with job performance. But to Councilor Reynolds' question earlier, we currently have over $175 million in pension liabilities. We only have about $80 million in our PRIT system. So we're almost about $100 million unfunded right now. And the mayor said earlier that pension costs are the budget buster in any city and town budget. So that's why I raised it. I raised it when the police chief had his contract, so this is consistent. This isn't playing favorites. Thank you.
Just a question. You said that you've asked the billing people what your rate would be or what we would be getting back from ambulance?
No, our billing, Counselor, is done by Fitchburg EMS, which is MedStar Ambulance. We provide all the runs sheets to them, and they do the billing. We keep track of all our calls, and we know what our payer mix is. In other words, how much is Medicare, how much is Medicaid, how much is private pay. I've taken them to private billing companies outside of MedStar and given them the breakdown of the number of transports we do with the payer mix, and they would tell us if we were doing our own billing and running our own service away from MedStar, that they felt we'd be making around $425,000 to $450,000, and we're making way more than that, because we'd have to pay for training costs, supplies are expensive, vehicles expensive. We're guaranteed all that from the contract we have.
How many ambulance vehicles are Fitchburg, I guess they're not, are they owned Fitchburg, or are they?
Yeah, they're dedicated to Fitchburg EMS. We now run our Rescue 3 with 2 firefighters, and then Fitchburg EMS, which is MedStar Ambulance, the corporate name, they run 2 vehicles dedicated. However, any of you that listen to the scanner, we go 5, 6 ambulances deep, and they provide us with backup ambulances from Battle Street, which is in Fitchburg.
So we
'cause they do other
technically have
areas.
one?
They usually have at least 2 sitting.
we.
We have
The
3
fire
total.
department.
Fire department has 1, 2 additional, 1 in the central station, 1 in the Oak Hill station. So
But those
3
are-
total.
But one is with Fitchburg Fire
Correct.
Department personnel?
Correct.
Is that BLS or is that ALS?
That is BLS, however, we do have a couple paramedics, firefighters, but it's basically a BLS truck.
So anytime they go out on a call, do they have to have an ALS ambulance dispatched as
No,
well?
we dispatch by protocol. We have a set protocol. It's actually a state protocol. What is an ALS call? What is a BLS call? Rescue 3, I think, does about 1,300 transports to Leominster Hospital a year, and most of those are BLS. So they do provide they go out alone on calls and provide BLS service on those calls.
And if we go out to a call with MedStar, and it's an ALS call, do we transport or does MedStar transport?
It depends. Since we've got our new vehicle, their medics likes to transport in our truck because it's bigger and more room to work on a patient. If it's transported in our truck, that is credited to our call if they're in our truck, even though it's their medics getting in our truck. And usually when you have an ALS call like that, you need at least 2 or 3 people in the back working on the patient. Once you've started IV lines, monitors, intubating a patient, all those things, you need at least a couple people working in the back of the truck.
Do we have a revolving contract with MedStar, or do we have a set contract that expires at X year?
We started with 1-year contract in '07, then we went to a 2-year in '08, and now we're currently in a 5-year contract that we increased from $400,000 for the calls to $450,000, and we added in a brand-new vehicle, which was $160,000. And I believe we'll be starting year 3 of that contract in August. So we'll have 2 more years to go.
How many firefighters on our side does that employ?
The $450,000 probably keeps with the new lower rates about 10 to 11 firefighters working.
So do we have 10 firefighters assigned to the
We have 8
ambulance?
regularly assigned, and by time you cover vacations and time off, it works out to be just about 10 positions that we need to cover those shifts on that truck.
Do the 8 firefighters that are assigned to that truck also do firefighter shifts?
That's correct. They're assigned, and they go when we have a fire call. If they're not on a medical call, they go and they work as a fire company. That's what brings us to our 14-man minimum, otherwise we'd be
Right.
at 12. Yeah. And we've had times when they've been at the hospital, but most of the time they've been available for firefighting duties, and they're fully trained firefighters as well as EMTs.
Thank you. Councilor Hay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Separate from the Fire Chief's presentation here, before we get started, I meant to ask a question regarding the process for these hearings. Am I correct in assuming that we're doing this like we have in the past? If people have recommendations to cuts, they'll just make the recommendations. Mr. Saracen will keep a tally, and then at the end of the process, we'd actually vote on all the recommendations?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Reynolds?
Regarding the pay increase for the fire chief, I think that we all, maybe a woman would use this term, you men wouldn't adore the fire chief. I think he's fabulous. I wouldn't. That's what I said. And maybe Dolores wouldn't agree with me. But your work is inspiring. Let's say that. But then we are the city fathers, mothers, to take care of the city and each individual in the city. And we have this shortfall, 80 million shortfall in pensions. It seems the conflict is dire when you say, keep giving more and increase that. I don't see how we can do that sensibly, common sense. So I want to address the mayor. Of course, my thought, Mayor, was when I heard this, I thought, well, if you increase our fire chief and our police chief, you are at the helm of, you deserve so much more money than you get. And but what I want to say to you is there any mechanism in our society that allows for the reality, economic reality of the times? Because I think we've all lived long enough, and we know people who worked hard all their lives, were fabulous, retired on a very low pension. People 20, 30 years later, they're receiving huge amounts of money and doing less work. Is there anything that can reflect the economic times? In other words, if the fire chief were to retire, whenever he retires, and we're at the bottom of the economic thing, might he receive so much percentage, let's say, and then if times get better, that can be increased, reflecting the time, and duly reflecting his work? Or are we like fixed in stone and cement? And maybe if you say we are, maybe that's some of the laws that could be changed so that we can survive. Do you follow my drift?
If I could sort of speak to that in generalities, and then drive down to some specifics. We have to value things in more than dollars. We have to value things in what we get in return for each dollar. So, for example, if we spend $1 and get 50 cents back, is it not better to spend $2 and get $4 back? So when we are making decisions, it is not purely based on the input. It is also based on the output. One of the things that has happened with both the police and fire department, the fire department in particular, if you look at the first budget that I put out and the one you have right now, or the first budget that I was responsible for seeing the end of, and the budget that you see right now, we have saved well over $1 million in, I would say, administrative level positions. Over the years, we've reduced the deputy chiefs and the captains by about 2/3. And we've, those duties, I have to say, we will probably not get back, at least the tenure that I'm mayor. If you think about those 16 positions, if you want to just call those about $100,000 apiece, never mind looking at their overall pension costs, you're talking about a savings of at least $1.6 million per year, plus their overall pension costs. So for one chief executive of that department to be able to absorb that type of permanent reduction in order to keep people on the ambulances, on the fire trucks, and frankly, the calls have not gone down, and I would say the call times have not gone down, and we have been incredibly lucky in terms of, and not just lucky, but I think it's actually good management in terms of how safe we've been able to keep the city from a fire safety standpoint with that type of yearly reduction in just the brass level. There's also been reductions in the lower level ranks, those of which I will say we will probably never return to where we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, but it would be nice to return to where we were maybe, let's say, 3 years ago. Those are permanent reductions, and those represent millions of dollars in savings every operating budget, as well as tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars in our pension costs over time. In addition, we've been able to negotiate, every time we beat 4% in terms of overall, is when we're able to lower the pension costs without actually throwing any money into it, and you know, basically looking at that overall liability and building it down. We've been able to do that every year because we've actually been able to successfully negotiate the healthcare costs. The fire department was a vocal part of that, the union being part of the executive committee that has negotiated with me over these years. In addition, most of the unions have given significant years of zeros, cost of living increases, step freezes, and giving back stipends. All of those have lowered our overall pension costs by tens of millions of dollars. So what we're looking to invest in is we're looking at quality versus quantity. Because at the same time, for example, we're going to have a certified library at about under $700,000 versus before, we would have to fund it at $1.2 million. That's a permanent savings of $500,000 per year to have a certified library. Again, I don't think we're going to go back to $1.2 million anytime soon. We're looking at the same thing with streetlights, getting the same amount of streetlights for much less. We're looking at the same thing with every single department by reducing clerical and by figuring out how to invest in technology and so on. That's how we're doing it. We're innovating. And part of the innovation does involve less staff and having a smaller staff actually do more work than had previously done before. That's training. That's picking the right people. That's making sure that we have the right compensation packages to attract and to retain them. Those are all significant management decisions. It's not just a simple matter of accounting. And all of those things are things that I am concerned about. And, you know, there are things that I think that Councilor Di Natale is absolutely on the right track in terms of daylighting, true transparency, for example. And again, some of it may seem political, but if I wasn't mayor and somebody else was sitting here right now, if I did not do well in November, that would have increased our lifetime overall pension costs by 6 figures. Think about that. So is that something that's transparent? Do we put a dollar figure on saying, here's a one person who didn't serve significant numbers of years. Here's another person who's approaching those years. Are those the types of discussions that we need to be having? I think so. And I think we're getting to that point where, in addition to looking at these budgets, you're now looking at what does it look like the year after that and the year after that, and what does it look like by having an operation budget and a capital budget. So I'm not saying we are anywhere near where we want to be or need to be, but I'm saying we are making those steps every year. And like the chief, my office has more work, is being paid less. And, we're trying to do the best that we can with these types of strategies.
I'm not quite done yet. I understand that, and that's the overview of the general philosophy. But I'm specifically with regards to the fire chief. I was asking you, and aside, did I hear that you actually received $140,000 this year through other means rather than straight salary?
Yes, last year, my W-2 was just under, I think, just under.
So why would we do the change if you have the capacity to receive the same amount? $140,000, why would, through other means, I don't know exactly what they were, but
This isn't 140, Council, and what we did is I negotiated a contract with the mayor.
it's the $144,840. Well, if you can receive nearly that amount without it going towards pension. However, let me just say, ma'am, what I was asking you is there any mechanism by which a person's pension can be reflected by the economic times that we're in? See, we're stuck because we agreed to pensions before, times have become bad, and we're strangled by previous commitments. Is there any flexible mechanism that should, and when the chief retires, he receives so much percentage, just like interest rates fluctuate, and that he would receive more when the economic times restore themselves. Another trend that I just want to say I'm hearing here right at the beginning, and I'm not in favor of it, is replacing one man with 2 men for less money. I think that a man's work, there's a certain justice, a recompense to his man's work. And that whole trend of making people work harder, more, for less money, I don't think that's a just response. It may be an economic aid at the moment, but in general, I don't think it's fair to people. Now, but back to the is there any mechanism by which the pension could fluctuate like that? For example, interest rates fluctuate.
The city doesn't dictate the rules of pension. We negotiate the number, we decide the number of employees and their rate of salary, which then reflects an overall pension cost.
Thinking in that process.
Yes. So what I'm
due to reality.
Yes. So in reality, if you are looking at whether one individual employee does add to the overall pension costs, you also have to look at the output. So if one person's salary does increase the pension costs by, let's say, $600,000, yet they're saving $600,000, period, yet they're also saving, let's say, close to $2 million a year and tens of millions of dollars in pension costs, then I would choose the path that I've chosen right now, which is actually reducing operating budgets and reducing overall pension costs by picking the right people and making sure that we retain them with the correct compensation package. So yes, the current economic reality is that we have reduced our operating costs and we have reduced our overall pension costs. And that in itself is a reflection of the economic times that we have.
Councilor Di Natale.
To counteract that we've reduced costs, the budget request for pension contributory is $8,060,000 this year. 3 years ago, it was $7,053,000, a 15% increase in our operating budget, which coincides with the mayor's earlier comments before we started that this is the major budget buster in the city. So it's gone up 15% in the last 3 years. Thank you.
Can I respond to that? The annual payment does not correlate the overall pension liability.
Thank you, Chief.
You all set, Council? Oh, thank you, Councilors.
Moving on to Human Resources, on page 9, under the summary of the Executive Office, it says total Human Resources, FY13 budget, $83,405. The Human Resource budget line is page 11. Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Council. As you see before you, my FY13 budget hasn't, you won't see any huge increases. It is what it is, and I'm be ready to welcome to answer any questions you might have.
Going once. Moving on. Thank you.
Okay, I just feel compelled to respond a little bit to Chief Roy's increase. 12 years ago, Chief Roy sat before the council and said, "We need a human resource guy." And I was up for appointment at that time. And I've been working now with Chief Roy for the past 12 years. And you won't find a better person than Chief Roy. He is just, he's articulate, he knows what he's doing, and if my place were on fire, I'd want him there. Thank you.
Thank you. Guaranteed no one's going to argue with you on that one. Moving on to the Law Department. Legal total on page 9, $257,700. Law Department budget is on page 12. City Solicitor Barrett, if you would.
Madam Mayor, Madam Clerk, Mr. Saracen, councilors. I guess I'd just start out, if I could, with the fact that we are trying to, overall, you'll see the reduction in the bottom line for the Law Department. We're holding the salaries at level with what they have been for the past 3 years. We hope to realize some savings with the, with Mr. Goldstein joining the Law Department and with the experience he has in dealing with labor and civil service matters. We are trying to expand into that area more ourselves, as opposed to having this performed by special counsel, by labor counsel, and therefore the biggest cut you see, I believe, there is the a reduction in the labor supplement. That is in somewhat predicated upon the belief that in the next year at least, we don't anticipate as many major contracts being negotiated. It's a somewhat fluid thing because we don't have any control over how many potential grievances or things, labor issues that could arise, but based on past experience, we think that we can reduce the budget for the labor supplement by that amount, with myself and Mr. Goldstein coming in and doing more of it. Some of the other areas where there's a reduction is in the special counsel area. We're hopeful that the litigation that's given rise to the need for the special counsel, particularly dealing with the airport community corrective action plan, will come to a conclusion soon, and so hopefully we'll not have that additional need for that expertise in that area. Another area where it's something of a shot in the dark is damages to persons and property. We really have no way of knowing in the coming year to what degree we will have litigation that otherwise is covered by our insurance, but in which we do have deductibles. We're hopeful that we will have a good year, and we won't have claims that are would necessitate. In some respects, some of the deductibles are covered by the departments if they have a budget, but some departments don't have a budget, and that's why it'll be flowed through the law department when we do need to pay damages and/or the deductibles for our insurance. There is, I'd like to point out one mistake, and I didn't catch it in the budget as far as fiscal year 12. It shows legal costs and expense of $5,000. I believe last year that was actually reduced to $2,000. I'm asking that be increased. And with respect to legal expenses, again, it's something of it's hard to tell where in any given year we're going to have expenses. In one year, we might have more filing fees and more deposition costs or appraisals that we need to do. In other years, we might have more expenses due to just general going to hearings, travel expenses, and things like that. One thing I think that we will incur in the coming year with myself and Mark taking over more of the labor stuff is that's going to be more going to hearings in Boston or Worcester. So I do anticipate our travel expenses would be greater, and quite frankly, we maybe should have put more in towards travel and meetings. But since it's all within the same category of expenses, it's kind of a fluid thing. If we find we're running high in legal costs and we're low on travel, we can, transfer. I believe it doesn't even require a transfer. Dick, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it requires a transfer. I mean, it can be drawn from that account.
Right. At the budget, it's approved, the council and the mayor approve it at the budget level, which would be legal expense. So as long as the department would stay within the $9,700, it's okay to go over in travel and meetings as long as you go under in another account.
Thank you, Dick. I think, just to sum up, I think that we're trying to do, I think we're busy. I think we do have a lot of work, and I think Mark has done really well transitioning. I'm not sure if I've done as well transitioning into the city solicitor's position, but Mark's done a great job transitioning into the assistant position. And I'd just like to point out the fact that with his able legal counsel, we were able to deal with a matter that's been a particularly troublesome one on Elm Street, and hopefully that will be laid to rest. As I said, we have had a busy year, and there are still several, as I discussed with you last week, a number of legal matters that are still pending, but I believe this budget reflects, I think, as accurate as we can, our anticipated legal expenses for the forthcoming year.
Councilor Hay.
Anyone
Yes,
has any
Mr. President, if I could
Oh,
just add a
yes,
few.
absolutely.
And John and I looked through this budget, and I think it's a savings from one year, from last year, this year, of $55,850, which it's a fair amount of money from the legal department. But I think in discussions with John, I think we can manage with what the budget, with the reduced budget, and work within that. Hopefully, we can stay within that budget and still produce the same sort of legal services that you're, that the city is accustomed to.
Thank you. Councilor Hay.
First, just a clarification from John. John, when you spoke about legal costs and expenses, are you saying the mistake was that in fiscal year 12, they wrote in here 5,000 and it was actually 2,000?
2,000, that's
Okay,
correct.
so when you say you want it to be increased, it's already been increased by the mayor from 2,000 to 5,000. You're not asking us to increase because we can't do that.
No, the
Okay,
increase.
just want to make sure that...
If you looked at it, the way it's printed, it looks like there's no increase
Yes,
there.
right,
I
but
believe
there
last
is an
year, in
increase
fact,
that's-
It was 2,000. We're
Right,
asking
that's
for.
been authorized by the mayor. Okay,
Right.
just wanted to get that clear. My second question, and I want to be very careful how I state this, because as Councilor Di Natale spoke earlier about another city employee, I certainly admire both of you gentlemen and your education and your work ethic and what the law department has done for the city of Fitchburg. The mayor changed things around a few years ago, and there are some questions about costs, and I think overall we do better the way that we're doing it than jobbing everything out. My question is that when Mr. Ciota became the city solicitor full-time, he was in City Hall full-time. That was an 8 to 5 job in City Hall, and you're not running those hours. Is that correct, John?
Yes and no, Counselor.
Okay.
I am not at City Hall 8 to 5. And I would venture to say I'm probably not working on the city's business specifically 8 to 5. But I know that the vast majority of my time is spent on the city.
Okay.
So I would have to say it's roughly 30 to 35 hours a week, roughly on the average.
Okay.
If I could, don't forget, we're actually paying for Mary within that budget as well, or her time.
What I would suggest to you, Counselor and Councilors, is that we are also providing a lot of administrative assistance, which, quite frankly, I don't know how Michael was able to do it
I guess, John, my concern is not...
without any secretarial help.
Right, not the big issue items that you guys deal with on a daily basis, that I understand. When we made the change, and this council approved it to go to the full-time city solicitor and have somebody come into the building, and I was weighing the pros and cons of everything, one of the big pros I got out of it was that all of the department heads said to me that they thought it was wonderful that when they had questions, immediately they could get up, walk down to the law department, speak to somebody, get response, get input, get ideas, get guidance, whatever you want to say, and all of those things. And I just want to make sure that somehow we continue to do that so that they can all still feel that they have immediate access the way they did when somebody was sitting in there for those hours. And again, not being judgmental, it's just,
No,
I
I
have
understand
a
you,
concern
Counselor, yeah.
for our department heads and want to make sure that their needs are being met.
I guess they would have to answer individually for themselves. I know, I try to be at City Hall at certain hours. I'm not always exactly there because I might have a meeting somewhere else at the hall. I might
Court
be
runs
going to
over.
a workers' comp hearing. And so if those dates, I won't be there. But I try to be there so that at least they will know, particularly for one example, purchasing. If they have contracts to sign, they know that I'll be there Tuesday morning or Thursday afternoon or Friday.
And with the change in technology, you can be available without being
Well-
here. I just want to make sure that we work at that.
There is a lot of, Counselor, if I could be at City Hall instead of dealing with email, I would trade in an instant.
Okay.
I'd just like to respond, and you know, Counsel, you make an excellent, point, because a lot of things, a lot of litigation is avoided by just speaking to the department heads or to really any employees that need to talk to you to avoid any sort of problems. And so John and I actually talked, and so where I'm going to be holding office hours on Thursday for sure, and then John, I know, is here Tuesday and some Fridays, and we're here for other meetings as well on Wednesday, so, we also find it very productive for us to get work done, to close the door in our office and actually produce, so we can answer, file complaints or answer complaints or do what we have to do. So there is a balance, but we're certainly trying to make ourselves available, and if you hear of anybody that says, gee, the legal department's not around for me, please let us know. I know I get emails quite often during the day, and I respond to them very often. I know John and I talk at least once or twice a day on different issues, so, we're very cognizant of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I have to predicate what I'm about to say by saying that this is in no way a reflection of the two individuals sitting in front of me, because it's never about that. But we currently spend a total of $151,000 for the city attorney and the assistant city attorney. We currently spend on average $90,000 for a third attorney to do labor negotiations, and we spend on average $15,000 per year on special counsel. That's about $250,000 a year. The city solicitor's salary back in FY08 was $56,868, and the assistant was $45,000, and that city solicitor had her own private practice. As Councilor Hay alluded to, one of the sticking points of transitioning to a full-time solicitor where there is pension and health care payments as well, is that he was going to give up his private practice, and that was appealing to a lot of us. My concern here is, once again, is this the best use of the money? I would contest that I don't see any reason why, like other cities and towns do currently, many cities and towns employ private legal services via contract. They don't pay pension, they don't pay health care. It's on retainer. It's a not-to-exceed PO, and if there's more that needs to be done, they do it. For the amount of money we spend right now, about $250,000, could we not get the same services for the same amount by contracting these services out? And I advocate wholeheartedly contracting out these two gentlemen. I don't want to get rid of them, but I feel as if we're not saving money in the best interest of the taxpayers by saddling the citizens with pension and health care costs when there are several cities and towns that employ private legal services. And for the amount of money some of those cities and towns pay per year, we could get the equivalent amount on our end for $250,000 without having unfunded liabilities. So I say keep the gentleman, obviously, but I don't understand why we haven't looked at that, and if we have looked at that, for me it's hard to justify to me that this is a cost savings. I don't believe it is. And my question to Mr. Saracen is the city attorney's position by ordinance, does that get a pension?
It could. It depends on the, it is a salary, so if a person is eligible to retire, they have to meet certain criteria that is governed, as the mayor said, by the state law.
Are the city attorney and the assistant city attorney, could they be eligible for those benefits?
Based on the way they're being paid now, yes.
Okay, so my point is getting rid of that ability and doing what other cities and towns do in privately contracting these services out. Keep the two individuals. They're doing a fantastic job. But there are other cities and towns that spend this amount of money, and they don't have them on full-time equivalent basis. The only last thing I'll say is that if there was an eligibility based on the current salary, that's $3.6 million in pension costs over 30 years. If we go contracted privately out, we cease that liability. And a lot of cities and towns have done it. So I don't like the way this is made up right now. This is in no way a reflection of the individual's job performance. I just feel we can get the same amount of work done for the same cost, but privately contracted. And the last thing I'll say is, on the budget where it says legal costs and expense FY11 actual $6,500, the status C for FY11 with encumbrances was $1,773. So I don't know why that says $6,500. The average spend in legal costs and expenses over 4 years is $1,334, and the mayor is funding that line item 275% above what they have spent, average 4 years. So I would make a recommendation to be put on the list that $2,500 be cut from that budget, that line item. And that would leave $2,500, which is still 19% more than what was average spent in the last 4 years. So there's still a considerable amount of leeway in that budget compared to the last 4 years of budgets. Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
There's a couple things I want to say. First is, in order to make the assumptions of the net impact, you do have to look at the entire equation. The entire equation includes the actual individual circumstances of the people in the particular position. So, for example, Attorney Barrett has been employed by the city for significant amounts of time. So, in fact, actually keeping him does not significantly impact the overall cost. In fact, changing out or replacing actually would not significantly lower that liability given the number of years of service. I just want to make sure that's clear. Also, Attorney Goldstein has been here for less than a year. So assuming he's going to be here for 10 or more years, that's when you're going to make assumptions in terms of overall net impact on pension costs. The other thing that I also want to state is that you have to look at the outputs. And again, this budget document is not going to tell you that alone. There are comparable size cities that spend twice this amount on legal services having various outside firms. And I can tell you, they do not get that service. They're sort of on call. You have to sort of come up with something that you want them to work on, and very rarely do I see them be proactive. One of the great things about legal and HR, if they are done correctly, is that you invest in them in order to save. As you know, we walked into this, a lot of us together, with significant liabilities of the city. We're facing significant liabilities of the city right now. Again, things that none of us created that are in the tens of millions of dollars. These are major issues that, frankly, I wish we had invested $25,000, $50,000 more a year to have avoided. The net overall benefit is significant. The city solicitors in general are saving us a lot of money, and I would say that these two in particular have also allowed us to do things that have built up for long, significant periods of time. And I could go through those things. I mean, I think one thing that happened recently is having Attorney Goldstein be intimately involved with the License Commission. With complicated laws, with things changing, these are significant areas in which we are liable, in which by having these types of services that we've never had before, we are going to see huge benefits for the city. So I would say, thank you for your support in terms of making this a full-time position with Attorney Ciota. I would say that Attorney Barrett is, he's certainly working this full-time, as is his assistant. And the things that I think should be noted is that from year to year, the types of things that you will see the legal department work on are going to evolve and change, because what we're doing is we're catching up on many things of neglect. For example, one of the things that Attorney Ciota started on was actually review of all the ordinances which hadn't been reviewed for decades, upgrading those. And one of the things that Attorney Barrett and Attorney Goldstein are working on are helping us catch up on HR and other legal procedures and so on, including working very closely with our boards and commissions. Those have been entirely neglected even during the 4 years that I've been here. These are things that we're going to continue to do, and in fact, if they do their job as they're doing it right now, they continue to do it, we may not need those services later on. So I just want to make sure that we look at these things at the whole picture, we look at the net outcome, and we also look at specifically what we are asking them to do and how that's benefiting the city of Fitchburg.
Councilor Caddy.
Under judgment awards, in 012, we spent 0. In 010, we spent $300,000. Was that the dispatchers? Well, I don't remember FY11. What was the 113? Who did that go to?
I think it was a labor grievance counselor with I believe it was an employee who had been terminated, filed a complaint that it hadn't been properly impact bargained, and then ultimately was ordered to return to the position.
Okay, thank you.
The back pay.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. President. We don't have the school department budget in front of us, but there's counsel needed for schools, correct?
Yes.
Is there any kind of plan now that the mayor has said that we've made our law department, that the lawyers that we have in the school department be part of, or maybe they are, part of the law department? Is there any, how much interaction do you have with them?
Well, Counselor, we do work with the school department on a number of different things, in procurement, and workers' comp. They do resort to separate counsel for some areas, in personnel administration to some degree. I'm not fluid with the school department's budget, but I do know that they have the authority to retain counsel, and they have, they do that from time to time, but I know one of the things that we're hopeful of doing is, working with them to cover more of that area too, but there's only so much, we can only be spread so thin. So I can't say for certain, what we can do in the immediate future with respect to the school department's budget on legal. But part of our services does include dealing with the school department.
You know the Massachusetts courts pretty well, John, and are you aware of other cities and towns that have one law department that is for schools, law, everything else? One department. Are most cities doing that? Are no cities doing that? Is it something we should look into?
Well, Counselor, I think that it runs the gamut. I think in this area, and I think cities of similar size to Fitchburg, I think you typically do have a situation where you do have counsel that's hired either as an employee or separate firms. But I think when you find some municipalities where the law department is totally in-house, you'll find 4 or 5 lawyers working for the city. So I'd have to say it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another,
I could speak to specifics rather than sort of generalizations. The school department right now does not retain counsel at all. So there is no law department within the school budget. Anything of significance does go through our city solicitor and assistant city solicitor. Those come up from time to time. Those are not consistent. There is a labor attorney that is used from time to time, but we really don't utilize this individual in contractual negotiations. Does not sit at the table, does not approve contracts, and is actually for very specific personnel issues as they come up that we don't have the in-house expertise for.
Is that Peter? Is that Peter? Okay.
Yeah. So at this point in time, there's no need to sort of combine departments, because right now there is no retainer, there is no department within the law department within the schools. And again, as things come up from time to time, I would say a significant amount of these questions either we had a meeting with the school department, either these 2 gentlemen know that they can be called, or if they don't have that expertise, then we'll continue to work with the current attorney that we have right now.
Council Di Natale brought up some numbers earlier, and it should be known too that the school and the schools council should be in that number as well. Although I understand why it's with the schools, certainly, but if you're overlooking the entire picture of the law department in the city of Fitchburg, you also have to remember that the school has its counsel as well. Thank you.
Councilor Reynolds.
I just want, for verification, to the mayor, a question through you to the mayor, to the council president, to the mayor. Did I understand correctly when you said that Attorney Barrett has already accrued so much time with the city that he's guaranteed X amount as a pension, and so that going to a private contract would not affect in very serious amounts our pension debts in the future. Did I understand that correctly?
I want to refer to my legal department, whether we can talk about individuals.
You said you have
But
to look at the overall picture. and
absolutely. So for example, if an individual has been employed by the city for a significant amount of time, additional years will obviously accrue a pension cost, but it's the accrual, not the entire pension cost that one needs to look at.
So you're saying in this specific incident with Mr. Barrett, Attorney Barrett, he's already accrued quite a certain amount, in that continuing with this type of plan is not a significant. You understand what I'm trying to say? Yes? Yes? And then it's a different case with Attorney Goldstein, because he's newly staffed.
Correct. We've been
He's
fortunate.
just beginning the accrual.
We've been fortunate to be working with Mr. Barrett for decades now, I have to say that.
19 years as of last week.
But that being said, I'm wondering if it would be useful to have a separate pension conversation so we can all understand the rules and the mechanisms of pension in general.
It might have been in general, but we as council members, I'm sure, are alarmed at the deficit in the pension responsive obligations of the city. I don't see how we can do it, and don't want that. You understand why we're probing, looking for perhaps some new ways. But I would like to also address the councilor who suggested outsourcing our legal affairs. I have never heard that that's terribly satisfactory. I am impressed with the numbers that you're bringing to us. There's no sense of any gouging that I'm aware of. And I have never seen, actually, such a sensible, reasonable request as you've made. So my questions and my probing about different systems is simply to try to find a new way for cities to cope with our obligations.
Councilor Thibault Munoz.
I guess, I don't know if it's just that I'm not clear or understanding, because standard going rate for billable or attorney's fees are about $150 an hour. So I'm just thinking, we're almost, I mean, I hate to say this,
Well, I mean,
put
it
it
just
out there,
depends what
but
attorney you want to hire.
that's what
I
I'm
mean,
saying. But on average, you know, from things that I've read, it's around there. And just in my calculations here on my computer, that's about $273,000 for 35 hours a week, which Attorney Barrett puts in. And so it just, to me, it's like a savings of $182,000. And I know $182,000 a year. And I know that, you know, obviously, long-term, there's some problematic issues with the pension system. And then I have two things to say about that, too, just because I know folks are watching out there, and, you know, people are only taking advantage of what's the law, right? And people put in their time and they work, and that's what they're due based on their work. They go into that job and that position because that's their right for working, and it's all part of the law. So I just want to, you know, put that out there. I know it's out of control, and I know that's an issue that's not in our control, but, you know, there's folks in this room who, you know, are going to be receiving a pension. It's well deserved, given the work and the time that they've put in, and they're right according to the law at this time. So I just kind of want to put that out there as well. But I don't know, maybe I'm just not understanding, but contracting out, how that's a savings versus having somebody in-house, given the arbitrary, you know, numbers that I just gave out just in my head. But that's all I wanted to say.
If I could just make one comment, Mr. President. John and I think of ourselves as legal advisors, not only just like city solicitors, assistant city solicitor. We think of ourselves as more like advising, you know, not only trying to keep people out of trouble or issues, but sometimes we have to brainstorm, sometimes with the strategy, sometimes we have to spend some time just sort of like dissecting a problem until we can run its course and kind of get a sense of where we want to go with it and what's the best course of action. And many times that takes a lot of time, It's just not billable hours. I mean, I think what's important to note is that we want to work through a problem and not just do, okay, this hour, you get billed a certain amount of money. It's just we want to be here to sort of solve a problem or prevent a problem.
And just, that's what I'm alluding to. I'm not understanding which one is, I'm just not understanding why contracting would be a more effective cost to the city. I know long-term, but immediate, it just didn't equate to me.
I guess I just have one question before I go on. I've made the whole round. You say that the $91,000 includes the clerical services and the city solicitor, so some of the work in your office as well.
Yes.
In the past, wasn't that a separate line item on the budget, and should we break out?
Mr. President, and in fact, as Councilor DiNatale referenced back in 2000, I guess fiscal 2008, it was broken out so that there was a separate, roughly, for the assistant, it was $45,000 salary and $15,000 for administrative office expense for clerical help. And for the city solicitor, it was, I believe it was $60,000 plus 15. I think, quite frankly, when Mayor Wong came in, she realized that the city solicitor was spending an awful lot more time for the cities, on the city's behalf, and was not getting compensated for the amount he should have, and needed to in order to survive. So that was enclosed within that. When Mr. Ciota came on to the city full-time and was working here at the hall full-time, I guess I'd have to mention that he was doing so without, I think, any real, to speak of, secretarial help or clerical help. I have had the assistance in my office of staff. My staff does a lot of work with respect to processing claims, and that hasn't, apart from what I have to do and the support staff I have for that, we really don't get anything extra for the time that my staff spends on, and I'm not complaining about that, it's just that puts a hole, and quite frankly, in terms of my remuneration, if you will, the city takes up the vast amount of my time, and not to get into specifics, but that also includes my support staff too. So we're not really getting any raise, and maybe it's certainly up for the council to decide whether or not you could save some long-term savings by contracting it all out. I just would mention, Councilor Tebow Munoz, that I think most attorneys in this area, 150 would probably be really lowball, and anybody inside of the 128 belt is looking at pulling down 350 to 450 an hour. It's hard to compare sometimes the apples to oranges.
I just didn't know if we should separate 90,000 into 75-15 or keep it as 90, pay the, put a line item for your staff as opposed to just showing that it's all going towards you when you really are supporting a staff as well.
Well,
Just a couple of thoughts on that. We actually discussed that pretty intently. I think that given that this is his first year as city solicitor, we're not sure how to predict the breakdown between his time and Mary's time. And frankly, when also in line with how lawyers bill out, they bill at a billable hour and then include all of that staff time within there. At the current rate that those two are actually working, if they were not city solicitor and assistant city solicitor, then they would only have to work respectively 7 hours and 4.5 hours a week, privately billed, to make what they're making as their current public. And I hate to, these were frank discussions that we had. They could make more in the private sector, and frankly, I have asked them to do more than I asked of the previous team of Ciota and Barrett, respectively, with less outside services and building that in-house. So they've got a smaller budget, they're being asked to do more than the previous years, and they could make significantly more if they were billing this out privately. So, I mean, part of me just wants to just continue to say thank you. Thank you for working at less than a third of what you would get, and continue to do good work for the city. And I think that's the commitment of being a public servant.
If I could just supplement what the mayor just said, and because I'm sure some of you will probably say, why on earth are you doing this then? I've been working for the city for 19 years. I have to say, a great love for this city. If I'd like to brag about the fact that even though I do live in Townsend, that Fitchburg is my city. If I could say that I was Cicero, well, Cicero came from Antium, but he was a citizen of Rome, and I think of myself as a citizen of the city. So I think I do it. I do like working with the people in the city, and I do like what I do. So that's partial explanation of why the cost is maybe as low as it is.
Councilor Hay.
Just following up on what you were saying, Mr. President, regarding the breakdown between the compensation and the money that they used to get. And John, I think he said it was 45 and 15, and 48 and 15, and 60 and 15. And when the mayor proposed it originally to combine that, it was because, we're paying for the services, just pay them directly, and then they pay out for those services. But one of the things we need to remember, and this is only a small one, let's everybody remember, there's a big thing here, is that Councilor Di Natale's concern about pensions is that these pensions are now based on that combined number. So instead of the pension being on the 48 and the 60, the pensions are now on the 60 and the 91, and that makes a difference in the long run. I'm not saying we don't get our bang for the buck here, and the mayor's done the cost analysis and determined that we get enough that it offsets that, and that's okay, but everybody needs to be aware that that's always there. I mean, just as an example, one person going from $60,000 to $91,000 a year, if they work those 3 years, and those are the 3 highest years of pay, that's $13,000 or $14,000 a year additional pension that they get. And if they live 20 or 30 years beyond their retirement age, that's substantial money. And I suspect that the mayor has factored that in and come to the decision that works there. But I agree with the council president. Maybe you need to look at that and determine that if money is being paid for services or for somebody else, we need to shape that in a different manner. Thank you.
Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you. I have not seen that cost analysis. I would love to see that cost analysis. I would love to see it from Mr. Saracen and Mr. Doheny. I'd like to know why there are cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth that don't do this. They may have different legal issues than we do, granted, but I'd like to know why they don't do this. Why do we do it? And how do they get by just privately contracting it out? Again, I feel like this discussion's getting into Mr. Barrett, Mr. Goldstein, which I want to kick myself for, because I didn't want this discussion to get to that point, because I'm advocating if we were to do this privately, we'd keep these two because they're invaluable. But there was a comment made earlier about the savings. Through you, Mr. President, Councilor Thibault Munoz, you're correct that immediately we're probably going to lose money by going private. But I'd love that present value analysis right now of what we're doing now, what will that cost us over 35, 40 years versus doing it privately contracted. What would that cost us over 30 and 40 years? And I guarantee the facts will show that even if we spent $50,000 more on legal services every year, it won't come close to what we're going to pay 35, 40 years out after retirement. And this is a general issue. This isn't just confined to the law department. That was my point, is that assuming we have now allowed the eligibility based on ordinance, assuming that they come to fruition, you're talking about $4 million. How much are we what are the opportunity costs of not doing it privately? That's all I've been asking. And I don't want to lose the services, I don't want to lose these gentlemen, but there are other cities and towns that don't do it this way. And I believe it would be a significant cost savings to the taxpayers over 30 or 40 years if it was privately done, even if it meant in the short term we have to eat some money. But in the long term, I believe it's going to pan out. And I'd like to see these other cities and towns in their books. I'd love to see 20 or 30 of them that don't do this. I want to know what their costs are. I'd like to ask their finance people, how do you get by? I just want to know. I've never seen that. So I'd be curious to know. If the facts show that what we're doing is going to save the taxpayers over 30 years, then I will stand corrected. But I'm not confident that's going to be the case. Thank you.
Briefly.
The actuarial, I would request that we have a whole separate discussion on pension costs. Pension costs have been an issue for decades. Guess when we started talking about this as an issue at the forefront? Pretty recently, because these are things that we are all working to make transparent. These were things, you know, when you were in the council previously, Councilor Reynolds, these were an issue. I don't think that these were discussed at budget hearings. But these are things that we are bringing forward, and frankly, the unfunded pension liabilities, the unfunded liabilities that we have are not because of present employees that we've had. It's because we haven't set aside the funding necessary to maintain those things year after year. So it's like saying, okay, you've got mortgage payments. What if you skipped all of your mortgage payments in the 80s? Guess what? You're going to have to pay those now. That's what we're paying down. We're paying down those things in addition to making our current mortgage payments. That's the issue. The issue is that for decades, we did not set aside money for pensions, for healthcare trust funds, for roads, bridges, you know, you name it. That's the issue. So we can spend a lot of time, and I'm glad to do this analysis. This is what I'm actually working towards. But you also have to understand that I'm working 120 hours a week for the city, and we also have, you know, very limited staff. I would love to be able to increase our financial staff to be able to do these types of things. This is exactly where we need to go, and this is exactly what I would propose doing. You also have to understand that we can all look at things from a different standpoint. So this individual right here, for every $1 million that he saves the city, he's going to have to be alive for another 77 years to make up for increased pension liability costs. So the question is, how do we come to terms with it? How do we figure out how many millions of dollars that we saved? $300,000. If we had saved that $300,000, had we had the correct services, that's 26 years for one person's increased liability costs. It's hard to quantify what we are saving in terms of the liability that we are not incurring. And you also have to look at the output. You cannot just look at the incremental salary increases and say, gee, look at that, especially since not only are we continuing to pay that, we're also paying down past mortgage payments. We're able to do that now in our current budget structure. So I would hope that the overall operations of the city will take consideration all those different factors.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a comment on that. It seems like in the past, even to have this kind of open discussion was taboo. And it is healthy, I think, to express the concerns and reality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Councilor. Thank you very much, Councilor.
Mayor's budget. From page 9, Mayor's budget, fiscal year 13, $149,597. Mayor's budget on page 10.
Good evening again, City Councilors. I can tell you what's on this page, but you have that in front of you. There's certainly a lot more than I think what this page will tell you, which is the output of the Mayor's office in terms of being able to provide the city with a lot more financial stability and management with less staff, and also the additional capital items that we've been able to put in place. Just a couple of things I want to point out. You will see that there have been reductions in the salary line items overall in comparison to where they were when I first began office. We have had changes in staff, and I have been able to hire staff who have continued to provide the same level, if not increased quality, at a lower price. And again, these are things that we've been able to negotiate when these individuals have come in. In addition, something that this budget does not show is, one of the things that we made sure to do is I no longer utilize a city vehicle, in which previously the gas and the insurance were all incurred through the city. I also don't incur expenses with a city cell phone either. In total, the non-budgeted items that you see here that we've been able to save exceed $10,000 a year, all of those which come out of my own pocket. We are glad to do those types of things. I've been daylighting the idea of us actually looking at this office as the executive office, and we all have to make important decisions on how we're going to manage the city over the long run. Without daylighting issues, without having good management that even understands long-term pension, liability costs, has the ability to negotiate, has the ability to manage, has relationships with other local, regional, state, and federal entities, you have to have that for $100+ million budget. And frankly, if you take the entire budget here of 3 employees plus all our expenses at less than $150,000, you will see that there are city managers out there who make this amount, more than twice that amount, just for their salary alone. And I'm not proposing that that's what we do as a city, but at some point in time, we have to have a frank discussion on what is it going to take to make sure that we have a good office that serves right now as CEO, COO, and CFO of a $100 million plus organization. You also have the mayor piece and you have the city management piece, all of that wrapped into this. And we have to have frank discussions on whether this is sufficient for us to be able to attract talent in the future, be it ultimately decided by the voters of the city, and whether this is going to keep us in line. Because frankly, the city has lost tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, in terms of missed opportunities, economic development, not to mention morale and so on in the city. Because some of the things we're doing right now, we could have done significantly sooner in terms of figuring out ways to do more with less, figuring out liabilities, being able to pay those down, and negotiating good contracts and daylighting those issues, because you certainly know that contracts and other things from this office have come before you without full information, have ended up costing the city significant amounts of money in the long run. So I just want to begin to daylight that particular issue, because that's something that we as a city are going to have to decide on as a whole, whether it's through a charter change in which there is a charter commission, which will involve a vote from the council, which will involve a petition with signatures, potentially will involve a vote by the state legislature, and certainly a vote by the citizens. But it is something that we need to daylight sooner than later.
Councilor Hay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam Mayor, just a question. The assistant to the mayor, last year, $46,197. This year, $41,030. I'm going to assume that that person did not receive a decrease. It's just that last year's was based on somebody who'd been here longer and had some time in.
You are correct. So this fiscal year 12 does include actually 2 individuals at 2 different salary levels.
Correct. But the budget for 13 at $41,030, did that person, that position, receive an increase from what they were paid last year? Because that's not showing here.
Yes.
Do we know what that was, approximately?
I don't know if there might have been an increase. I think it's a 2%.
That's fine.
It was around 40, yeah, it was around 40,000.
Okay.
And the discussion regarding that was the individual has received a degree now. So we had a discussion at him coming in at a lower salary.
Just, it doesn't read here, so I just wanted to make sure that was okay. Thank you.
Councilor Caddy.
That's my question. Only because you brought it up, yeah. City solicitor sitting here tonight, working 35 hours a week, is making $91,000. Fire chief sitting here tonight makes double your salary plus another $20,000. I don't know where you rank in salary in the city, but I'm sure there's patrolmen that make more money than you do. How can you, unless you're financially wealthy, I mean, how can you not have the city pay for your cell phone? How can you not have it pay for your car? How can you have it not pay for your your gas. I mean, I think you're selling yourself short. You're doing a good job financially, but I don't think you should be selling yourself that short. I don't think you should be sitting here, and I think the council's going to see it during every budget session that we have, that the department heads are making a lot more money than you are, and you're their boss. I know that you have to come to the council would have to vote for a raise for you, but there are things that you could be receiving that you're saying you're giving up, and I just think that that's commendable, but it's not fair. I hate to hear you say what you said tonight. So that's more of a statement than anything else, but before this council session is over, I think you have the ability to revise this, and I'd like to see you take some of those things that you much more deserve than I think you're taking.
If I could actually comment on that. It was the city council and myself that we collectively decided that we were not going to have private vehicles be utilized in the city. So that was something that we decided ourselves. The other thing, too, is that just doing an analysis, I would have my own private phone anyways. And frankly, with unlimited plans these days, for me to say, let me carry around 2 phones versus just using 1 phone with an unlimited plan for both those things didn't make any sense. So frankly, those are the types of things that I think should not and should not actually incur more dollars to the city, given the decisions we collectively made.
I'll stop talking in 1 second, but you used the word CEO. You are the CEO of the city. You deserve to have your cell phone paid for. You just deserve to have your car and your gas paid for. You deserve that. And to sit here tonight, again, I want to reiterate, a person in this room is making more than double your salary plus another $20,000. It's just not fair. It's just not fair, and I hope you reconsider it.
Councilor Reynolds.
Since we're commenting on modes of living, I hear this, what was the information the mayor supplied, and I say that's what a leader does. A leader leads, shows ways of sacrifice. Yes, she's do more, a lot more. But that's how I received that information.
Okay. Any further comments? Councilor Thibault Munoz.
Interesting to know how much you do save the city, because I know, these are real numbers that could be presented to us in the future that that may or may not affect us, and we may want to either set a precedent and say we're not going to do this now because we like this, or just to know, because I think I agree with Councilor Caddy, and I also agree with Councilor Reynolds that it definitely is a sacrifice that a leader does make, and I think you're leading by example, and I think that in these times that's really admirable. But also at the same time, you are the lowest paid mayor in the state of Massachusetts, and you do a lot of work, and I do see that you are here 120 hours, working 24 hours a day, and so that's a reality. And like you said, we need to have those frank conversations about what kinds of incentives and what kinds of packages we're going to be able to offer future folks. And obviously, always thinking of the sustainability, but keeping that also in mind.
Thank you. Tomorrow night on the agenda at 7:30, we have Finance and Administration Department, Auditing Division, Employee Benefits, where we can have a nice, healthy discussion on healthcare costs and pensions, miscellaneous, Assessors Division, Information Technology Division, Purchasing Division, and Treasurers Collectors Division. There's just one other thing I'd like to throw out there, if you would mind. Our final review is Tuesday, June 26th. It's a week after our June 19th meetings with the schools, and usually by the time we get to the 19th, we're ready to go. So if you want to consider meeting on the 20th which is the Wednesday following that school division meeting, and maybe then we would be able to cancel the 26th or hold the 26th if we have issues that we can't resolve at that time, but consider maybe wrapping up on the 20th instead of the 26th, so that we don't have all that much time. I mean, everybody's usually ready to go on the budget once we have our final discussion or our final presentation, so if anybody has any conflicts, let me know, but maybe we'll consider doing the 20th as our final wrap-up. Thank you. Motion to adjourn? Second. All those in favor? Opposed?